Now it's time to announce the pregnancy. And Harry wants you to know that the papers were saying that Meg was battling fatigue and dizzy spells and she couldn't hold any food down, but actually she was totally fine and walking around just fine. So, she was a real dynamo, he says. And I mean, this was lucky because they were embarking on their greatest tour of all time. So it's good that she wasn't dragging everybody down with her sickness. He claims that when they went to Australia and Fiji and New Zealand, she just dazzled everyone. Dazzled, that's his word. And in fact, at one rousing speech, she even got a standing ovation. Well, yeah, because people didn't hate her at this point. I mean, I know he claims everybody did. Now, I think some people were beginning to give her the side eye, especially after some things had come out about the wedding. But I don't even think we quite knew that just yet. I think that kind of came a little after the wedding. Anyway, then he tells her this bewildering statement. He tells her, "You're doing too well, my love. Too damn well. You're making it look too easy. This is how everything started with my mother." Oh God, his mother again. Can you imagine being married to somebody who, his mother's dead, and yet you can't even get away? Every minute of the day, he's always talking about my mummy this and my mummy that. I think it's odd he keeps calling her his mummy. Anyway, whatever. But what a real Debbie Downer. I mean, was he jealous or what's going on here? You can't stand that everybody hates her. You freak out that the papers are writing ugly things about her. When she gets a standing ovation, you toddle over and say, "You're doing too damn well, my love." Well, what do you want? What do you want, Harry? You want to be upset. That's what you want. And then this bewildering statement, yet another bewildering statement. He goes, "Maybe I sounded mad, paranoid, but everyone knew that Mummy's situation went from bad to worse when she showed the world, showed the family, that she was better at touring, better at connecting with people, better at being royal than she had any right to be." Than she had any right to be? Look, you fool. Do you not know who your mother was? She was a Spencer. She was of this ilk. Look, what are you talking about? Like, these were her people. She had any right to be? What? What are you talking about? They invited Diana in to the family. She was hand-selected. They wanted her because they thought she would be good at the job. They thought that she could do it. They wanted her because she was, this young virginal beauty that they could hopefully train and teach how to be this royal person. Like, had any right to? What are you talking about? Now, Meghan, you could say, okay, well, it's a little, as an American outsider, all right, okay, maybe. People could be surprised that she would do well at the job just because what does she know and who really is she? No one ever thought either one of you had it, and you can't, suddenly show your cards now. What are you talking about, Harry? Do you not know who your mother was? That was not some sort of sad little Cinderella story where they plucked her up out of obscurity, out of the dustbin of society and raised her to new heights. And then shocker, she did extraordinarily well and people loved her. Your mother came from somewhere, okay? It's not a nobody. Anyway. Then he goes on to say that it was just this wonderful, jubilant situation because for once, not a negative word was written. But of course, that wasn't likely to stay. It all changed. Oh, how it changed. Then he says stories rolled in like beakers on a beach. First, a rubbish hit piece by a hack biographer of Paws, who said I'd thrown a tantrum before the wedding. Then a work of fiction about Meg making her staff miserable, driving them too hard, committing the unpardonable sin of emailing people early in the morning. According to him, she just happened to be up at that hour, trying to stay in touch with night owl friends back in America. She didn't expect an instant reply. He says that she also was said to have driven an assistant to quit. But in fact, that assistant had been asked to resign by Palace HR because Weedman showed evidence, says Harry, that this assistant had traded on her position with Meg to get freebies. I don't think that was the assistant trying to get freebies. We all know that Meg was over there handwriting letters in her quote-unquote magnificent calligraphy to these different fashion houses in order to get free things. If the assistant was doing it, it's because at Meghan's bidding. Anyway, because we couldn't speak publicly about the reasons for the assistant's departure, rumors filled the void. In many ways, that was the true start of all the troubles. Shortly thereafter, the Duchess' difficult narrative began to appear in all the papers. I mean, the thing is, you only have to watch. I mean, there's just so many clips of Meghan just being dismissive and rude and just like with no class or manners, like all the time. All the time. You see her in interviews all the time, like being just unconscionably rude to people. Like the time she told that interviewer that she liked his stutter. What a rude thing to say to somebody. Like, what in the world? No, we all know why she does these things. It's always a power play with her. But she thinks we don't notice? Anyway, she is a difficult person. She is difficult. Empirically, that person is hard to get along with. She would be somebody who you would never feel like you were on even ground in a discussion with her, because you'd always be trying to figure out, like, what's going on here? Okay. He goes on and on and on, saying everybody's coming out against Meghan. And the papers are reporting that Kate and Meg are not getting along. Somebody writes that Meghan had reduced Kate to tears about the bridesmaids' dresses. And of course, we all know it was the other way around. And this is just so much that I cannot get past. He says, I read this story in disbelief. Of course, Meg didn't. She still wasn't reading anything. She'd heard about it, however, since it was the only thing being discussed in Britain for the next 24 hours. And as long as I live, I never forget the tone of her voice as she looked at me in the eye and said, Has I made her cry? Her cry? Okay, so little put upon Meghan. She can't believe it. How could anybody say this? Everyone knows she had been the one on the floor crying. Okay, so now it's time to have a second summit with Willie and Kate, because this time, the first time wasn't enough. You know, when they were talking about, what about the Easter eggs and the place cards and all this trash? Apparently that hadn't fixed anything, shocker of all shockers. So they decided they're going to have another meeting, but this time on their turf, with their IKEA lamps and their sofa from sofa.com. He says that they all gathered in the little front annex of their apartment, and this time, there was no small talk. Kate got things rolling straight away by acknowledging that these stories in the papers about Meg making her cry were totally false. I know, Meghan, that I was the one who made you cry. Who believes that she said that? I sighed. Excellent start, I thought. I mean, Meghan might have been crying, but it was only because she was frustrated that she wasn't getting her own way. Meg appreciated the apology, but wanted to know why the papers had said this, and what was being done to correct them. In other words, why isn't your office standing up for me? Why haven't they phoned this execrable woman who wrote this story and demanded a retraction? Harry writes that Kate was flustered and didn't know how to answer, and then Willie chimed in with some very supportive sounding evasions, but of course he knew the truth. No one at the palace could phone the correspondent, because that would invite the inevitable retort. Well, if the story's wrong, what's the real story? What did happen between the two duchesses? And that door must never be opened, because it would embarrass the future queen. The monarch always, at all costs, had to be protected. There isn't any reason to correct this story. Who cares? Meghan, just continue to go out, do the right things, be a kind person. Eventually, that'll all die down. Who cares? Okay, so, I shouldn't say who cares. If I was being painted in the papers as this destructive human being, this absolute, Tasmanian devil who's coming in and wrecking everything, and I felt like it was unfair, I'm sure that I would want people to stand up for me. But at the same time, when are you going to move past these things? Like, when are you just going to be like, okay, this is really unfortunate. I really hate that this has come out. But I can't live my life in a past moment. They might have misunderstood what happened. The papers are misunderstanding me, but I'm just going to go out and I'm going to prove them wrong. That's all you can do at this point. Okay, so then they start talking about how, how did the press even get this story? Like, that's the real question. If none of us said anything, well, then how did it happen? Who amongst our people are just feeding bits of information to the press? Why did anybody know that Meghan and Kate had a fight? Oh, but then all is revealed. We went around and around. The list of suspects became vanishingly small. Finally, Willie leaned back and conceded that while we'd been on tour in Australia, he and Kate had gone to dinner with Pa and Camilla. And alas, he said sheepishly, we might have let it slip that there'd been a strife between the two couples. Okay, but so talking to Pa is now tantamount to leaking something to the press. You can't go to dinner with your dad and be like, man, things aren't right with us. Kate and I, Meghan and Harry, it's not the dream team we had all hoped that it would be. It's been really frustrating. You can't go to dinner with your dad and tell him this? I mean, so, like, I guess you can't talk to anybody. I put a hand over my face. Meg froze. A heavy silence. So now we knew. I told Willie, "You, of all people, should have known." He nodded. He knew. More silence. It was time for them to go. What is the implication here? That if you tell Pa anything, then Camilla's going to hear, and then Camilla's going to run straight to the press? I mean, that's clearly the implication. That now, like, you can't talk to anybody. It's all just, hole up with your own little problems. No one can ever find anything out. Okay, so now we go on to a long little jag about all the destruction in the news and how they were constantly pitting Catherine and Meghan against each other. Okay, well, I do have this to say about that. There's a lot of comparison of the two women, and I think that's completely unfair. Well, it's unfair because, like, even before we decided we didn't like Meghan, don't compare women. Don't do that. Like, we do enough of that on our own. It would be horrible to have the press constantly coming at you and saying, "Oh, you wish you were as, long and lithe and beautiful as Catherine. Don't you wish you could pull clothes off that way? Catherine's waist is so small, yours is so thick." It's like, can you imagine? That would be so demoralizing. And Catherine is just so natural. What a winning spirit she has. And it would just be like, I'm not saying Meghan couldn't have made an effort. I'm not talking about personality at all. I'm just talking about physical appearances. There was a lot of comparison with the two women, and I think that that's tacky and tasteless. You don't need to compare women, right? So any stories in the press that were trying to pit those two against each other, I can understand being really aggravated about that. But Harry gives us some examples of how they would do that, and I think that he's missing the entire point of the stories. For example, he says that there was a story in the press that said that Meghan enjoyed avocado toast. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? What a dull story. It really it was not a great day in the news for that day. But she really likes avocado toast. She'd been, quote unquote, caught eating it. And the reason the press said this was so terrible is that harvesting avocados, according to them, was hastening the destruction of the rainforest, destabilizing developing countries, and helping to fund state terrorism. That's a lot riding on the back of an avocado. But then, of course, the same media had recently swooned over Kate's love of avocados. "Oh, it makes Kate's skin glow," they said. Well, that's just a dumb story. I mean, really, truly, if that was in the press, talk about bow ring. But what I will say is, I think that what they might have been saying about Meg is, she's all the time, day long, talking about global propriety and taking care of the planet are big things for she and Harry, they say, as they jet around constantly and continually. But because she's always because she's always expressing this need for conservation and care for the planet, maybe they were just saying, okay, but if you really care about that, then you can't be hypocritical in your lifestyle choices. I think maybe that's what they were trying to say. I don't know. Now, probably not. Probably it was just, let's find something we can bash her with, and nobody wants to bash Kate, so who cares? But if we wanted to give it some sort of meaning, it may have just been like, you say you care about the planet, but then you're indulging in things that, according to report, are harmful to the planet. Okay, so Harry says that it was no longer about two women fighting. It was no longer about two duchesses at odds, or even two households. Now the papers were saying that it was one person being a witch and causing everyone to run from her, and that one person was my wife. And he says that in building the super narrative, the press was clearly being assisted by someone or multiple someones inside the palace. But this is the thing. How can they get this narrative? If Meghan is this classy person that you say she is, like the last chapter he was talking about all these lovely, kind things she was doing for everybody, why weren't those reports coming out? Why wasn't anybody like, oh, she's so nice, she's like arranging ice cream socials? Like, by the way, who even does, what are you talking about? I also have a Sunday school party. Who's having an ice cream social? But whatever. And he said that she was bringing all sorts of gifts and presents to the depressed and sick people that were working in the office, and buying them lamps and heaters with her personal credit card. And he's saying she's doing all this. Okay, well, but if there's somebody in the palace who's leaking them stories, why aren't they ever leaking those things? Could it be because there's a plethora of other instances that are going down in which the kind thing she's doing just pale in comparison? Anyway, he says that there are just so many headlines all about Meg. This is what he says. One day it was, yuck, Meg's bra strap was showing, classless Meg. Next day, yikes, she's wearing that dress, trashy Meg. Next day, God save us, her fingernails are painted black, goth Meg. The next day, goodness, she still doesn't know how to curtsy properly, American Meg. And the next day, crikey, she shut her own car door, uppity Meg. You know, so the thing that is wild to me is why, again, I can only say this so many times, why would you keep reading it? Why would you invest your time? Why, it's just a bunch of trashy magazines. I fail to understand why anybody would ever invest any of their time in these dumb magazines. Anybody of worth doesn't read those. So if a bunch of trashy people want to read their trashy magazines and believe trashy things, okay, that's a whole subgroup of people. The people of substance and worth aren't going to believe those stories. So, and presumably those would be the people that you would want to spend your time with. So what do you care about this whole, subculture of foolishness? That doesn't pertain to you. Move on.